Hey everyone, Dana with the OT Guide. If you're new, welcome to the channel. My name is Dana. I'm an occupational therapist in Southern California. And today I'm going to talk about two different disorders that look very similar and are very hard to distinguish, but they're actually very different. And they are sensory processing disorder, otherwise known as SPD, and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD. Now, both disorders manifest in a student as hyperactivity, difficulties focusing. Sometimes these students can have a hard time regulating their emotions and controlling their impulses. Both of these disorders are disorders of the brain, and they both are disorders of regulation. Now, while both SPD and ADHD look very similar, they actually are very different. So let's talk about SPD first. SPD is a disorder of misinterpreting sensory information. So your student is getting partial or misinformation from the environment, and it's basically messing with how they perceive the world. It's messing with their senses. And current research indicates that students with SPD have abnormal white matter in the posterior part of their brain, in the back of their brain. And it's this part of the brain that's responsible for sensory integration. So because our students are getting misinformed information about their environment, it's causing maladaptive behaviors. For example, a student with SPD might interpret some light background music as really loud and overwhelming, and they might cover their ears and scream. Some students with SPD might have an extremely high threshold for pain. They might fall down the stairs or bump their head and not have an appropriate pain response. While current research indicates the brain with SPD has abnormal white matter, research indicates that the brain with ADHD has deficiencies in a specific neurotransmitter, and that neurotransmitter is norepinephrine, and this can occur in 4 different areas of the brain: the frontal cortex, the limbic system, the reticular activating system, and the basal ganglia. And a deficiency in norepinephrine in each of these areas can cause trouble sitting still and focusing and being able to plan and organize. So how can we tell if a student has SPD or ADHD, and why is it important? Well, first off, it's really important because the treatments for both are very different. So if you give a student with SPD ADHD medication, it's not going to help the problem, and vice versa. But telling these two disorders apart is extremely difficult, and sometimes students have both, which makes it even more challenging. But there are 2 ways, or 2 little strategies I use to see if I can decipher between whether a student has one or the other. And the first thing I do is I look at how a student behaves across different environments. So typically speaking, if a student has SPD, their sensory needs will be very consistent and very predictable across environments. And it will not change if they're engaging in a preferred or non-preferred activity. So if a student is engaging in a preferred activity and is really calm and regulated and focused, but then they engage in a non-preferred activity like a teacher-led activity, and they're running all over the place and they're not focused, that might be an indicator it's not SPD and it's more likely ADHD, because their sensory needs are not consistent across environments. The second way I look into it is I look at how does my student respond to behavioral strategies and sensory strategies. So a student with SPD typically responds really well or better to sensory strategies. They might also benefit from behavioral strategies, but they really benefit from sensory strategies. For example, if a student is seeking out proprioceptive or heavy work, and you give them heavy movement exercises like carrying heavy objects or doing push-ups, you'll see oftentimes that they seem calmer and more regulated after, because they've met their sensory needs. Whereas a student with ADHD, if you give them sort of sensory strategies and interventions, you'll notice that it might help them a little bit, but it really won't help them a ton. A student with ADHD might benefit from behavioral strategies like first then schedule. So first work, then play, or a visual schedule, or the use of a timer to transition from a preferred activity to a non-preferred activity, the use of a star chart or token economy, etc. So since both disorders originate in different parts of the brain, their treatments are very different. So for a student with ADHD, research shows that the most effective treatments are medication to help control the neurotransmitters, specifically norepinephrine, as well as behavior therapy to work on executive functioning skills, so planning and organizing and impulse control. So those are the methods to help a student with ADHD, whereas for a student with sensory processing disorder, we might suggest sensory strategies or a sensory diet, or even refer a client out to an outpatient sensory integration clinic, which is a clinic designed to help students with sensory processing disorder help make better sense of their environment and interact with their environment in a more organized and adapted way. So I hope this video was helpful for you. If you liked it or have any questions, comments, concerns, comment below, and I look forward to seeing you all here next time. Bye.